The stage lights dimmed at the Staples Center in Los Angeles on June 24, 2009. Michael Jackson stood alone in the center of the massive arena, his silhouette casting long shadows across the empty seats. This wasn't just another rehearsal. This was supposed to be the beginning of his greatest comeback, a series of 50 sold-out shows in London that would remind the world why he was called the King of Pop. But something felt different that night. The energy that usually radiated from his every move seemed muted, as if a heavy weight pressed down on his thin shoulders. His dancers watched from the wings as Michael moved through the choreography for Earth Song, one of his most powerful performances. His voice, though strained, still carried that unmistakable quality that had captivated billions. The crew had noticed changes in recent weeks. He seemed more fragile, more distant, yet somehow more determined than ever. Between takes, he would sit quietly, drinking water, his eyes focused on something no one else could see. The director, Kenny Ortega, approached him with concern, asking if he needed to rest. Michael shook his head gently and whispered something that made Kenny's eyes well up with tears, though he wouldn't reveal those words until much later. As the rehearsal continued past midnight, Michael's personal assistant noticed him clutching his chest briefly during a break. When asked if he was okay, Michael smiled that famous smile and said he was fine, just tired. The truth was far more complicated. 4 months, Michael had been struggling with crippling insomnia, unable to sleep for more than a few hours at a time. The pressure of the upcoming tour weighed heavily on him. He wanted perfection. He needed redemption. The past decade had been brutal, filled with accusations, trials, and a media circus that seemed determined to destroy him. These concerts were his chance to show the world who he truly was, to let his art speak louder than the rumors. That night, after the rehearsal ended around 12:30 a.m., Michael left the Staples Center and was driven home to his rented mansion in Holmby Hills. His 3 children were asleep upstairs, unaware that their father was struggling. In the darkness of his room, Michael sat on the edge of his bed, exhausted but unable to rest. His mind raced with thoughts of the performances ahead, the choreography that needed to be perfect, the songs that had to be flawless. He thought about his children and what legacy he would leave them. He thought about his fans around the world who had never stopped believing in him, even when the rest of the world seemed to turn away. Dr. Conrad Murray, his personal physician, had been staying at the house to help Michael with his sleep issues. Murray had been administering various medications to help Michael rest, though the exact nature of these treatments would later become the subject of intense scrutiny. Michael trusted Murray, believing the doctor understood his desperate need for sleep. Without rest, he knew he couldn't perform at the level expected of him. Without the performances, he feared he would disappoint millions who had already purchased tickets, who had invested their hopes in his comeback. As dawn approached on June 25, Michael finally felt himself drifting toward sleep. The medications were taking effect. His last conscious thoughts were of the stage, of the music that had defined his entire life, and of the message he wanted to share with the world. He had spent his entire existence trying to spread love, unity, and healing through his art. Now, as he slipped into unconsciousness, he could only hope that his legacy would survive whatever came next. The King of Pop closed his eyes, unaware that he would never open them again. The sun rose over Los Angeles on June 25, 2009, bringing with it an unbearable heat that would make the day feel even heavier with tragedy. Inside the Holmby Hills mansion, Michael Jackson's bedroom remained quiet. Too quiet. Dr. Conrad Murray had been monitoring his patient throughout the early morning hours, but sometime around 10:40 a.m., everything went terribly wrong. The doctor discovered Michael wasn't breathing. His skin had turned pale, his body cold to the touch. Panic seized Murray as he began performing CPR on the bed, a surface far too soft for effective chest compressions, but he was alone and terrified. Michael's personal assistant heard the commotion and rushed into the room. The sight that greeted him would haunt his nightmares forever. The man who had moonwalked across every stage in the world, who had defied gravity with his dance moves, now lay motionless, his legendary body failing him. Murray shouted for someone to call 911 while he continued desperate attempts at resuscitation. The assistant's hands trembled as he dialed, his voice breaking as he tried to explain the emergency. The operator's calm instructions felt surreal against the chaos unfolding in that bedroom. Upstairs, Michael's 3 children, Prince, Paris, and Blanket, were being kept away from the scene by their nanny. They sensed something was wrong. The usually busy household had erupted into frantic activity. Voices shouted. Feet ran down hallways. Their father, who always made time to say good morning no matter how tired he was, hadn't come to see them. Paris, only 11 years old, began crying without knowing why, a child's intuition sensing that her world was about to shatter into pieces. The paramedics arrived at 12:22 p.m., racing through the gates of the mansion with equipment that represented Michael's last hope. They found Murray still performing CPR, sweat dripping down his face, his hands shaking with exhaustion and fear. The paramedics quickly assessed the situation. Michael's pupils were dilated and fixed. He showed no signs of life. They immediately began advanced life support, inserting breathing tubes, administering medications, shocking his heart with defibrillators. For 42 agonizing minutes, they worked on him in that bedroom, trying every technique, every drug, every procedure that might bring him back. The decision was made to transport Michael to UCLA Medical Center. As paramedics wheeled him out of the house, his face covered with an oxygen mask, a small crowd of neighbors and staff had gathered outside. They watched in stunned silence as the stretcher was loaded into the ambulance. No one wanted to believe what they were seeing. This was Michael Jackson, the immortal entertainer who had survived everything the world threw at him. He couldn't be dying. Not like this. Not now, just days before his comeback. Inside the ambulance, paramedics continued their efforts during the short drive to the hospital. They radioed ahead, alerting the emergency department that Michael Jackson was incoming in full cardiac arrest. At the hospital, a trauma team assembled, doctors and nurses who had treated thousands of patients but never imagined they would be fighting to save the king of pop. When Michael arrived, they took over immediately, moving him into a trauma bay where they continued advanced resuscitation efforts. They tried everything. Medications to restart his heart. Electric shocks to jolt it back to rhythm. Manual chest compressions that went on, each thrust a desperate plea for his heart to beat again. But Michael's body wasn't responding. The medical team looked at each other with growing desperation. They knew. Everyone in that room knew. Yet they couldn't stop. This was Michael Jackson. The man whose music had been the soundtrack of their lives. They kept working, kept trying, kept hoping for a miracle that wouldn't come. Meanwhile, in a private room nearby, Michael's family began arriving. His mother Catherine, his siblings, all racing to the hospital after hearing the news. They weren't allowed in the trauma bay, forced to wait in agonizing uncertainty, praying for good news that the doctors couldn't provide. In the final minutes before doctors officially declared Michael Jackson dead at 2:26 p.m. on June 25, 2009, a nurse who had been in the trauma room would later share something that broke hearts worldwide. She revealed that among Michael's belongings was a small handwritten note found in his jacket pocket. The note wasn't dated, but the handwriting was unmistakably his, the same careful script he had used to write lyrics and messages to fans throughout his life. The words on that paper would become known as his last message to the world, though no one knows exactly when he wrote them. The note read, "I just want to be remembered for giving everything I had. The music was my gift, but love was my message. Tell my children I tried. Tell the world I cared." These simple sentences, written in Michael's own hand, contained the essence of everything he had spent 50 years trying to communicate. Here was a man who had given his childhood to entertainment, who had sacrificed normal development for the sake of performing, who had endured unimaginable scrutiny and pain, yet still wanted only to be remembered for love and dedication. When Kenny Ortega, the director of the This Is It tour, was told about the note, he broke down completely. He revealed that during that final rehearsal on June 24, Michael had pulled him aside and said something remarkably similar. "I want this tour to be about more than music," Michael had told him, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want people to remember that we have to take care of each other. We have to heal the world. That's what all of this is for." Ortega had hugged him then, not knowing it would be the last meaningful conversation they would ever have. Michael's obsession with his legacy wasn't born from ego. It came from a lifetime of being misunderstood. From his early days with the Jackson 5, performing in clubs where children shouldn't have been, to his solo career where every move was analyzed, criticized, and often twisted, Michael had felt the weight of public perception crushing him. The child molestation accusations had devastated him more than anything else, not because he feared prison, but because they contradicted everything he stood for. He had dedicated his life to protecting children, to giving them joy, to using his fortune to help sick and disadvantaged kids worldwide. The accusations had felt like the cruelest betrayal of his intentions. His children were his redemption in many ways. Prince, Paris, and Blanket represented his chance to finally get parenting right, to give them the childhood he never had while also passing on the values he held sacred. He was fiercely protective of them, often covering their faces in public not out of shame but to shield them from the relentless scrutiny he had endured his entire life. On the morning of June 24, just hours before his final rehearsal, Michael had spent time with his children, making them breakfast and talking about their plans for after the London shows. He had promised Paris that he would take her to see Buckingham Palace. He had told Prince they would visit the best recording studios in England. He had carried Blanket around the house, making the little boy laugh with silly faces and gentle tickles. Michael's sister La Toya would later reveal that in the weeks before his death, Michael had seemed to know something was wrong. He had called her one evening in early June, his voice heavy with exhaustion and something else she couldn't quite identify. Fear, perhaps. If anything happens to me, he had told her, make sure my children know I loved them more than life itself. Make sure they know everything I did was for them. La Toya had brushed off the comment at the time, thinking her brother was just being dramatic, overwhelmed by the pressure of the upcoming tour. Now those words haunted her, playing on an endless loop in her mind. The note found in Michael's pocket, combined with these final conversations, painted a picture of a man acutely aware of his mortality, desperate to ensure his true intentions were understood. He didn't want to be remembered for the tabloid headlines, the bizarre stories, the mockery and ridicule. He wanted to be remembered for the joy his music brought to billions. He wanted to be remembered for songs like Heal the World and Man in the Mirror, that called people to be better, to care for each other, to look beyond superficial differences. Most of all, he wanted his children to grow up knowing their father had been a good man who tried his best in an often cruel world. The news began spreading at approximately 2:45 p.m. Pacific time, though initially it was just a rumor, a whisper that something terrible had happened to Michael Jackson. Within minutes, that whisper became a roar. TMZ was the first to report it officially, Michael Jackson has died. The website crashed immediately under the weight of millions trying to confirm what they refused to believe. Social media platforms that were still relatively new in 2009 exploded with activity. Twitter went down briefly because of the sheer volume of posts about Michael. Facebook feeds filled with shock, denial, and overwhelming grief from people around the world. At UCLA Medical Center, the hospital staff prepared for the inevitable press conference. Doctors who had fought to save Michael's life now had to face cameras and announce their failure. Outside the hospital, fans had begun gathering, many in tears, some still hoping it was all a terrible mistake. When a hospital spokesperson finally confirmed that Michael Jackson had been pronounced dead at 2:26 p.m. due to cardiac arrest, a collective wail rose from the crowd. Grown men fell to their knees sobbing. Women screamed in anguish. Strangers hugged each other, united in their grief for a man most had never met but all felt they knew intimately through his music. Michael's family was escorted out of the hospital through a private exit, shielded from the growing mob of media and mourners. Katherine Jackson, his mother, looked as though she had aged a decade in a few hours, her face frozen in shock and grief. This was her baby, the child who had shown extraordinary talent before he could read, who had made the family famous, who had never stopped being her sweet, sensitive boy despite all the fame and fortune. Joe Jackson, his father, maintained a stoic expression, but those who knew him could see the guilt flickering in his eyes. The complex relationship between Michael and his father had been well documented, and now there would never be a chance for true reconciliation. Inside the mansion in Holmby Hills, the most heartbreaking scene was unfolding. Someone had to tell Michael's children that their daddy wasn't coming home. Paris, Prince, and Blanket were brought together in a private room. Their grandmother Catherine, despite her own devastating grief, tried to find words gentle enough to deliver the impossible news. When she told them their father had gone to heaven, Paris screamed no, over and over, her young voice raw with a pain no child should ever experience. Prince, trying to be strong as the eldest, wrapped his arms around his sister while tears streamed down his own face. Blanket, only 7 years old, didn't fully understand, asking repeatedly when Daddy would come back from heaven. Around the world, reactions poured in as the reality set in. In Tokyo, fans gathered at electronic stores watching news coverage on display televisions, many wearing single white gloves in tribute. In London, where Michael was supposed to perform at the O2 Arena, thousands converged on the venue, creating an impromptu memorial of flowers, candles, and handwritten messages. In New York's Times Square, every screen seemed to be showing Michael's face, his music videos playing on repeat while tourists and locals alike stopped to watch and mourn. The Ethiopian community in Washington, D.C. held vigils, remembering how Michael had used We Are the World to raise millions for their famine relief. The entertainment industry went into shock. Madonna released a statement calling Michael the King of My Heart. Quincy Jones, who had produced Michael's greatest albums, issued a statement saying his heart was broken. Elizabeth Taylor, one of Michael's closest friends, was reportedly too distraught to speak publicly. Beyoncé cancelled a concert, unable to perform after hearing the news. Justin Timberlake, who had clearly been influenced by Michael's style, posted that his childhood idol had died. Every major artist seemed to have a Michael Jackson story, a moment when his music or his kindness had touched their lives. Radio stations around the world immediately switched to playing Michael Jackson marathons. His songs filled the airwaves, each one a reminder of his genius and now a trigger for tears. Billie Jean played in cars where drivers had to pull over because they couldn't see through their tears. Man in the Mirror echoed through grocery stores where shoppers stopped mid-aisle, overcome with emotion. Human Nature drifted from windows where people sat listening, trying to process the impossible. His music became a global funeral procession, billions of people united in their grief through the songs that had defined their lives. The sheer scale of the mourning was unprecedented in modern times. News programs compared it to the deaths of Elvis Presley and Princess Diana, but even those didn't capture the truly global nature of Michael's impact. He had fans in every country, every culture, every demographic. From children who had just discovered his music to elderly people who had watched him perform as a child with the Jackson 5, everyone felt the loss personally. Social media became a digital memorial, with people sharing their Michael Jackson memories, the concerts they had attended, the moments when his music had helped them through dark times. The number of tributes, videos, and messages was staggering, a testament to how deeply he had touched humanity. In the days following Michael Jackson's death, the world began to truly understand what had been lost. Investigators started examining the circumstances surrounding his death, focusing particularly on Dr. Conrad Murray and the medications Michael had been receiving. The term propofol entered the public consciousness, a powerful anesthetic that should never have been used outside a hospital setting. The revelation that Michael had been so desperate for sleep, so consumed by the pressure of perfection, that he had resorted to such dangerous measures, added another layer of tragedy to his story. He hadn't just died, he had been driven to his death by circumstances that should have been prevented. The memorial service held at the Staples Center on July 7, 2009, was a global event. Over 31 million Americans watched it live on television, with billions more tuning in worldwide. The same arena where Michael had rehearsed just days before his death now hosted an outpouring of love and grief that seemed endless. Stevie Wonder performed Never Dreamed You'd Leave in Summer, his voice breaking with emotion. Mariah Carey sang I'll Be There, the Jackson 5 song that had launched Michael's career. Usher broke down crying while trying to perform Gone Too Soon, unable to continue as his grief overwhelmed him. But the moment that truly broke hearts globally came when Michael's daughter Paris, just 11 years old, stepped to the microphone. With her voice trembling but determined, she said words that would be remembered forever. Ever since I was born, Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine. And I just want to say I love him so much. Then she collapsed in tears into her aunt's arms, unable to continue. In that moment, millions of people around the world saw not the tabloid figure, not the controversial celebrity, but the father who had raised 3 children who clearly adored him. It was the humanization Michael had always sought but rarely received during his lifetime. The investigation into Michael's death eventually led to Dr. Conrad Murray being charged with involuntary manslaughter. The trial revealed shocking details about Michael's final hours, the medications he had been given, the desperation that had led him to allow a doctor to administer propofol in his bedroom. Murray was convicted and served 2 years in prison, but many felt justice hadn't been truly served. Michael was still gone. His children were still fatherless. The 50 concerts that were supposed to represent his comeback would never happen. The This Is It documentary, compiled from rehearsal footage, would be the closest anyone would get to seeing what could have been. Yet even in death, Michael's message continued to resonate. His album sales skyrocketed, introducing his music to a new generation. Man in the Mirror topped charts again, its message of personal responsibility and change taking on new meaning. His humanitarian work received renewed attention. People learned about the millions he had donated to children's charities, the hospitals he had funded, the causes he had championed. The Guinness World Records certified him as the most charitable pop star in history, having supported 39 different charitable organizations. These facts had always been true, but in death, they finally received the attention they deserved. Michael's children, raised largely out of the public eye, grew up carrying their father's legacy forward. Prince became a correspondent and producer, showing an interest in the business side of entertainment. Paris pursued acting and modeling, while also becoming an advocate for mental health awareness, openly discussing her own struggles with the kind of honesty her father might have appreciated. Blanket, who now goes by Bye Guy, has remained more private but is involved in film production and charitable work. All 3 speak of their father with deep love and respect, determined to preserve the truth of who he was beyond the headlines. The handwritten note found in Michael's pocket that final day, along with his last words to friends and colleagues, became a mission statement for his legacy. "I just want to be remembered for giving everything I had. The music was my gift, but love was my message." These words now greet visitors at various Michael Jackson tributes and museums around the world. They appear on murals and artwork honoring him. They are quoted by fans, by performers, by anyone trying to understand what drove this complicated, brilliant, troubled, generous man to push himself to such extremes. 15 years after his death, Michael Jackson remains the best-selling artist of all time. His music still fills stadiums, weddings, parties, and quiet moments when people need to feel something powerful. Thriller still electrifies dance floors. Billie Jean still showcases the greatest pop music ever recorded. Heal the World still calls people to be better than they are. Every moonwalk performed by dancers around the globe is a tribute to his innovation. Every singer attempting a vocal run owes something to his technique. Every performer trying to connect with their audience is following a path he blazed. But perhaps the most powerful part of Michael's legacy isn't in the records or the accolades. It's in the memories of people who saw him perform and felt transported. It's in the tears of fans who still visit his grave at Forest Lawn Memorial Park, leaving flowers, notes, and single white gloves. It's in the children he helped through his charities, many now adults with children of their own, who remember the mysterious stranger who paid for their treatment or education. It's in the moment when someone discovers his music for the first time and experiences the same electricity that captivated audiences for 5 decades. Michael Jackson wanted to be remembered for love, and in the end, that's exactly what he achieved. The love poured out after his death, the ongoing devotion of fans worldwide, the way his music continues to bring people together across all boundaries, that's his true legacy. He gave everything he had, just as his final message said. The music was his gift, delivered with a level of talent that appears once in a century. But love was indeed his message, woven into every song, every performance, every humanitarian gesture. That message endures, carried forward by millions who refuse to let the King of Pop's dream die with him. His last words broke hearts, but his life's work continues to heal them.